The air in the Greenwich estate was thick with the scent of white orchids and old money, a fragrant lie that clung to the crystal chandeliers and polished mahogany. Outside, a gentle rain whispered against the Georgian windows, washing the manicured lawns in a soft grey light. Downstairs, the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking champagne flutes marked the final celebration before the wedding of the season. But here, in the master suite, a profound silence reigned. Eleanor Vance stood before the full-length mirror, a vision in silk, her posture as flawless as the diamond on her finger. Yet her reflection showed something the guests below could not see, a chilling stillness in her eyes, a quiet disconnect from the fairy tale that was supposed to be her life. The room was a gilded cage, and she had just begun to feel the coldness of the bars. It was a mundane task that shattered the illusion. She was searching for a pre-nuptial addendum in one of Julian's leather briefcases, a simple piece of paper in a sea of corporate documents. Her fingers, however, brushed against something unfamiliar, a sleek, cold rectangle of glass and metal hidden in a side pocket. A second phone, a tremor of unease, sharp and unwelcome, went through her. She told herself it was nothing, a work device for international clients, an explanation he would surely have. But her intuition, a tool honed in boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, screamed otherwise. With a deep, steadying breath that did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart, she pressed the power button, and the screen blinked to life, opening a secret door into the abyss of his deceit. The messages were a cascade of cruelty, each one a calculated strike against the woman she thought she was. She saw the affair with Chloe laid bare in intimate photos and casual betrayals. Then came the pregnancy, a fact discussed with the cold pragmatism of a business merger, but the voice notes were what truly broke her. She listened to Julian, her Julian, his voice a venomous whisper, mocking her devotion, detailing their plan to seize control of her fortune after the wedding. He laughed about her supposed naivety, a sound that echoed in the silent room and cracked the very foundation of her world. Her body began to tremble, uncontrollably, the impeccable facade of Eleanor Vance, heiress and bride, crumbling into a million sharp, painful pieces on the Persian rug. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent, blurring the opulent room into a watercolor of sorrow. The pain was an ocean, and she was drowning in it. For a moment, she was just a girl whose heart had been shattered. But as she stared at her own devastated reflection in the phone's dark screen, something shifted. The flood of grief receded, leaving behind an icy plain of pure, unadulterated fury. Her breathing steadied, her spine straightened, and the tears solidified into a diamond-hard resolve. You just can't imagine the strength a person finds when they hit rock bottom. And it's why sharing these stories is so important. If our journey resonates with you, please subscribe, because your support allows us to continue giving a voice to these moments of transformation. The betrayed bride was gone, and in her place stood an executor, her mind already calculating the first move in a war he had just unknowingly declared. With hands that had steadied from their violent trembling, Eleanor carefully wiped her fingerprints from the second phone. She navigated back to the lock screen, powered it down, and slid the cold metallic rectangle back into the hidden pocket of Julian's briefcase, nestling it beside a stack of meaningless quarterly reports. The act was methodical, devoid of the frantic energy that had consumed her just moments before. Each movement was precise, a surgeon replacing an instrument after a fatal diagnosis. The shattered bride on the floor was gone, and in her place stood the architect of a new reality. The Persian rug was no longer a witness to her collapse, but the silent ground upon which she began to build the scaffolding of her retribution. The tears had dried, leaving behind the faint, salty trace of a promise to herself. Her mind drifted back to a memory, sharp and clear, from when she was 12. She was sitting in her father's cavernous office at the top of the Vance Capitol building, the city of Manhattan sprawling beneath them like a circuit board. He had spun his large leather chair around to face her, his gaze intense. He wasn't talking about stock prices or mergers. He was talking about chess, a game he had insisted she master. "Emotion is a liability in a king's game, Eleanor," he had said, his voice a low rumble. "Your opponent will use your anger, your fear, your love against you. Never let them see where you are weakest. Let them believe they are winning right up until the moment you say checkmate." The lesson, dormant for years, now awakened within her, a cold guiding principle. The click of the bedroom door handle was a gunshot in the silence. Julian entered, his face a perfect mask of loving concern. "There you are," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I was getting worried. Everything all right?" He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against him. Eleanor forced her muscles to relax, to accept the embrace that felt like a cage of snakes. She could smell his cologne, the same scent he wore the day he proposed, and a wave of nausea rolled through her. "Just looking for the final guest list," she lied, her voice a flawless imitation of a happy bride. "My mother thinks we forgot her cousin from Boston." He chuckled, the sound now grating and hollow, and kissed her temple, completely oblivious to the ice forming in her veins. Later that night, when the house was finally still, Eleanor slipped into her study and made a call. She didn't dial her mother or her best friend. She dialed the private number of Marcus Thorne, the family's lawyer for over 40 years, a man whose loyalty was to the Vance legacy, not to any single individual. "Marcus," she began, her voice a low, steady whisper, "I need you to listen very carefully. Do not ask questions until I am finished." There were no tears, no wavering in her tone. She laid out the discovery, the betrayal, and the first brutal strokes of her counter-offensive. On the other end of the line there was a long silence. Marcus, who had seen her grow from a quiet girl into a sharp businesswoman, recognized the voice he was hearing. It was the voice of her father, resurrected in his daughter. Sleep offered no escape. She found herself wandering the moonlit halls of the estate, each portrait of a Vance ancestor staring down at her with silent judgment. The life she had been building with Julian was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was never really there. She remembered their first trip to Lake Como, the way he'd looked at her in a small candlelit trattoria, telling her he had never felt so seen. Was any of it real? The question was a venomous whisper in her mind. The love she had felt, so pure and all-encompassing, now felt like a foolish girl's fantasy. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest and making it difficult to breathe, but she refused to let it crush her. The days leading up to the wedding became a masterclass in deception. Her mother, Constance, fluttered around her with fabric swatches and seating charts, her conversations a cheerful monologue about the future. "Julian is just so perfect for you, darling. He understands our world. I can already picture him on the board of the foundation," she would say, oblivious to the storm raging inside her daughter. Eleanor would smile, nod, and offer the correct opinions on floral arrangements, all while her mind was calculating risk, analyzing legal loopholes, and rehearsing the lies she would have to tell. Every toast from a well-meaning relative, every congratulatory call, was another layer of suffocating pretense she had to endure without cracking. The weight of it all was immense. One afternoon, seeking refuge, she locked herself in her father's private library. She ran her fingers over the spines of his books on economic theory and military strategy. Tucked inside a worn copy of The Art of War was a handwritten note from him, dated a month before he died. It wasn't about business, but about her. "Your greatest asset isn't your name, Eleanor. It's your mind. Never let anyone make you doubt its power." Reading those words, her mission crystallized. This was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about protecting a legacy, an empire built by a man who believed in her. It was about proving him right. It's in these quiet moments of revelation that we find our true path, and I hope by sharing this, it encourages you to find yours. If these stories help you feel stronger, please consider subscribing to support our work. Julian's greed, once a subtle undercurrent, was now becoming a palpable force. He began pressing her on the pre-nuptial agreement, suggesting a minor addendum that would grant him executive signing authority on a new subsidiary account immediately after the honeymoon. "It's just to streamline the Kellinger acquisition, darling," he explained, his tone casual, "so you don't have to be bothered with it while we're away." He was getting impatient, his arrogance making him sloppy. He saw the finish line and was breaking into a full sprint, unaware that she was the one who had moved it. His eagerness was the fuel she needed, confirming the cold, hard data she had stolen from his phone. He was walking directly into the cage she was building. Working in encrypted channels with Marcus, Eleanor began to weave her web. They didn't just amend the prenuptial agreement, they drafted an entirely new set of corporate documents. This included a power of attorney that looked ironclad but contained a single fatal flaw, a clause that rendered it void if activated under specific conditions she had already secretly met. She also created a honeypot investment vehicle, a shell company, for the very Kellinger acquisition Julian was so eager to control. It was designed to be irresistible to him, a seemingly unprotected pot of gold. She used her deep institutional knowledge of Vance Capital, the kind of nuanced understanding he had always dismissed in her, to make the trap flawless. The rehearsal dinner was the ultimate test of her resolve. Chloe was there, seated at a table across the room, her pregnancy subtly visible beneath a designer dress. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and in that moment, Eleanor felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated hatred. She had to stand beside Julian, his hand possessively on the small of her back, and listen to his father give a gushing speech about her grace and kindness. She smiled, raised her glass, and projected an image of serene happiness, all while picturing Chloe and Julian in a cold, concrete cell. The performance was exhausting, a drain on every ounce of her willpower, but she held firm, her composure a shield of impenetrable steel. That night, she found herself unable to face the opulent master suite she was meant to share with Julian. Instead, she was drawn back to her father's study, the one place in the sprawling estate that felt like a sanctuary. She sank into his worn leather armchair, the scent of old books and faint cigar smoke enveloping her like a familiar hug. For the first time since her discovery, she let a single tear trace a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of profound loneliness. She was utterly alone in this fight, playing a game with the highest possible stakes, and for a brief, terrifying moment she feared she would fail. But then she straightened her spine, wiped the tear away, and let the cold fury return. On the morning of her wedding, Eleanor stood on her balcony as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft rose. The gentle rain from the night before had washed the world clean, and the air was crisp and cool. Below, the final preparations were underway. The marquee was being draped in white silk, and the sound of a string quartet warming up drifted on the breeze. She was about to marry the man who had systematically dismantled her heart and plotted to steal her birthright. There was a tremor of fear deep within her, a primal instinct to run, but she silenced it. She was not a lamb being led to the slaughter. She was the hunter, and the wedding aisle was simply the path to her blind. Months later, the air in the Vance Capital boardroom was as sterile and cold as the view of the Manhattan skyline it commanded. Julian sat across the vast mahogany table from Eleanor, his posture radiating a smug entitlement. He had won. In his mind, the game was over, and he was merely collecting his prize. He had demanded this meeting, demanded the divorce, believing his carefully constructed power of attorney gave him all the leverage he needed. Eleanor, however, looked nothing like a defeated woman. Dressed in a severe but elegant charcoal suit, she was the picture of corporate authority. She said nothing, simply sliding a leather-bound folder across the polished surface. Inside were the divorce papers he had been so eager to see. He smiled, a predator's grin, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the one in the trap. He picked up the expensive fountain pen but paused, his ego demanding one final performance. "You know, for someone so smart, you were remarkably blind," he began, his voice a low, condescending drawl. He leaned back in his chair, recounting his brilliance with relish. He detailed how he had funneled millions through the Kellinger acquisition, a deal she had so helpfully facilitated, into a series of untraceable offshore accounts. He laughed about her devotion, mocking the love she had so freely given him as a pathetic, sentimental weakness. He didn't just confess, he gloated, painting a vivid picture of his betrayal as a masterpiece of strategic genius. All the while, Eleanor listened with an unnerving stillness, her gaze unwavering, letting him pour every last drop of his poison into the open air between them. With a final, self-satisfied sigh, Julian uncapped the pen and scrawled his signature across the documents with a theatrical flourish. He pushed the folder back toward her, the sound of it scraping against the wood, echoing in the silent room. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you, darling," he said, the term of endearment now a final, twisted barb. Eleanor didn't even glance at the papers. Her eyes remained locked on his. "The power of attorney you're so proud of," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the force of a landslide, "was a phantom. It contained a dissolution clause triggered by the very first transfer you made. It was legally void before the ink on your first wire instruction was dry." The confident smirk on Julian's face froze, then slowly began to crumble as her words sank in. His face cycled through a rapid progression of confusion, denial, and then dawning, sickening horror. "That's impossible," he stammered, his voice losing its arrogant edge. "My lawyers—" Eleanor cut him off, her calm composure a stark contrast to his rising panic. She gave a subtle nod toward a magnificent white orchid on the credenza behind him. "And every word of that brilliant confession you just gave, every detail about the offshore accounts, the fraud, your intent, it's all been recorded. As the full weight of his miscalculation crashed down upon him, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. 2 men and a woman in dark, severe suits stepped inside, their expressions grim and official. They didn't look at Eleanor. Their focus was entirely on the man whose empire of deceit had just collapsed into a pile of dust. As the federal agents approached the table, one began to read Julian his rights in a flat, dispassionate monotone. His face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He looked at Eleanor one last time, a desperate, hateful plea in his eyes, but he found no trace of the woman he thought he knew. He saw only a stranger, forged in the fire of his own making, her strength a mirror reflecting his own pathetic greed. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, her voice cut through the air, clear and final. "You thought you were stealing my money, Julian," she said, not with anger but with the profound quiet of a battle won long ago. "But all you did was give me back to myself." Udom. With Julian and Chloe facing long prison sentences for fraud and conspiracy, Eleanor stepped fully into her role as CEO of Vance Capital. She did not inherit the position. She earned it in a trial by fire. The sterile boardroom, once the stage for her greatest betrayal, was transformed under her leadership into a hub of innovation and ethical practice. She systematically dismantled the old boys' club culture that had allowed a predator like Julian to thrive, promoting women and minorities to key positions and implementing a new era of radical transparency. She was no longer just her father's daughter, the quiet heiress playing a part. She was a leader forged in her own right, her authority absolute, her vision clear. The name Vance, once a symbol of cold, untouchable wealth, began to represent something new: resilience, integrity, and a formidable strength that had been tested and proven unbreakable. The millions Julian had siphoned away were eventually recovered through a complex legal battle. But instead of absorbing the funds back into the corporate coffers, Eleanor used every last dollar to establish the Phoenix Foundation. Its mission was simple yet profound: to provide legal aid, financial counseling, and psychological support to women who had been victimized by emotional and financial abuse. She used her own story, anonymously at first, as the cornerstone of the Foundation's outreach, turning her deepest wound into a source of strength for countless others. Her pain had been repurposed, transformed from a private agony into a public shield. It's stories of resilience like this that give so many of us hope. And by subscribing, you help us continue to share these powerful journeys of transformation and give a voice to the voiceless. For a long time, Eleanor believed her heart had been permanently encased in ice, a necessary casualty of the war she had to win. But slowly, warmth began to seep back in. She met a man named Daniel, an architect with kind eyes and a quiet confidence, at a charity auction for her foundation. He knew of the Vance name, of course, but he was more interested in the way her mind worked. The passion with which she spoke about structural integrity in both buildings and in people. Their relationship was built not on the grand, hollow gestures she had known with Julian, but on late-night conversations, shared laughter over simple meals, and a mutual respect that felt more solid and real than any diamond. He admired her for her scars, not despite them, seeing them as the beautiful, intricate lines on a map that had led her to become the woman she was. 2 years later, Eleanor stood at a podium accepting a National Philanthropy Award for the work of her foundation. The room was filled with applause, a sound that was no longer a hollow social obligation, but a genuine recognition of the change she had created. Daniel was in the front row, his smile her anchor. As they left the event, walking hand in hand through the crisp city night, they passed a newsstand where a paper displayed a small article on the final, failed appeal of Julian and Chloe. Eleanor glanced at it for only a moment, a flicker of a past life, before turning her gaze back to the man beside her and the bright, limitless future they were building together. The vengeance was complete, but her true victory was not in his downfall, but in her own magnificent, inspiring rise from the ashes.